This is crazy. 7 Democrats and an independent just torpedoed everything. They just gave in without getting the one thing they've been demanding for the past 40 days. And well, I'm actually going to be talking about 9 members of the Democratic caucus. I'm talking about these 8 because that's the exact number that Republicans ended up needing to break up the filibuster. And that because there was actually a Republican holdout, Rand Paul. The main thing, they get the 60 votes. They vote on a package that includes a stopgap funding bill that'll reopen the government through January 30th. Also, the package includes several bills to fund some government operations for the entire fiscal year, which is through September 2026, including agricultural programs, military construction, and Veterans Affairs. Also, one of the most notable things is going to include a full year of funding for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, otherwise known as food stamps. And the Senate deal would bring back federal employees fired during the shutdown and guarantee pay to those who either worked without pay or were furloughed, which is something that is normally provided, but also something that Trump threatened to withhold. But also, a huge thing is that what's missing is an extension of the enhanced tax credits that millions of Americans rely on to lower costs for health insurance purchased through the Affordable Care Act. Right? Instead, this deal, it just sets a date for a vote on extending ACA subsidies to take place in December. So there is no guarantee whatsoever that this will clear the Senate, let alone the House. And so immediately, you saw a big backlash inside of the Democratic Party with, for example, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying, people want us to hold the line for a reason. This is not a matter of appealing to a base. It's about people's lives. Working people want leaders whose word means something, with many House Dems reportedly talking about supporting primary challengers to their colleagues in the Senate. And on that note, you had Representative Ro Khanna going after Chuck Schumer, even though Schumer wasn't among those who voted for the deal, saying Senator Schumer is no longer effective and should be replaced. If you can't lead the fight to stop healthcare premiums from skyrocketing for Americans, what will you fight for? And that, as you had Bernie Sanders criticizing the move not only from a policy perspective, but from a political one. We're saying that this is the exact opposite of what Dems should have taken away from their domination on Election Day last week.
And what the election showed is that the American people want us to stand up to Trumpism, to his war against working class people, to his authoritarianism. That is what the American people wanted, but tonight, that is not what happened. So we've got to go forward, do the best that we can to try to protect working class people, to make sure that the United States not only does not throw people off of health care, but ends the absurdity of being the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people. We got a lot of work to do, but to be honest with you, tonight was not a good night.
And Bernie definitely wasn't alone in arguing this point of view, especially as most voters, they blame Trump and Republicans for the shutdown. With these 8, they caved just hours after Donald Trump was viciously booed at a Commanders game. So again, outside of those 8, not all Dems are unified in being against this. Or you had Abigail Spanberger, who just won her election last week, Virginia's new governor-elect, backing the deal. And then with that, one of the state senators, Tim Kaine, who is among those who voted for the deal, argued that this move, it's actually the best chance to get the ACA subsidies extended, saying lawmakers know their constituents expect them to vote for it, and if they don't, they could very well be replaced at the ballot box by someone who will. Right? And the thing to keep in mind there is that Virginia is home to thousands of federal workers. You also had Jackie Rosen of Nevada, right, another senator who voted for the deal, essentially arguing that it just wasn't worth trying to outlast Republicans because they were more willing to let Americans suffer, saying unfortunately, it's become clear as we go deeper into the second month of this Republican government shutdown that President Trump and Washington Republicans are weaponizing their power in alarming ways to inflict unimaginable pain and suffering on working people. Trump and his Republican cronies on Capitol Hill do not give a damn about hurting working people, and their conduct over the last month has been nothing short of appalling. Now, all that said, technically, as I'm recording this, not everything is set in stone, but it could take days for a final bill to move through the Senate, and the House, which has been out of session since the 19th of September, they need to come back to Washington to vote as well, with likely almost every Republican needed to get it passed. And there, while they may ultimately not get much to say in the matter, you had Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries vowing Democrats would fight against it, and adding, Donald Trump and the Republican Party own the toxic mess they have created. But then also with this, I'll say, in the meantime, while that's playing out, the effects of the shutdown, they're only going to continue to be felt. And I mean, not only in the time it takes to get this passed, but also it'll be felt even after it ends in some places. For one example, U.S. Airlines just canceled more than 2,000 flights yesterday for the first time since the shutdown began, and there were more than 7,000 flight delays, according to FlightAware. But then also, you've had officials saying that the country's longtime shortage of air traffic controllers, it may only end up getting worse after all of this ends. You have people like Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy saying that some have been speeding up their retirements lately, saying up to 15 or 20 a day are retiring. And then another example is, the more than 42 million Americans who rely on food stamps. They've been helpless as the Trump administration has fought tooth and nail not to give them the aid they've qualified for. There's been a whole thing. The White House first refused to tap contingency funding to keep that coming through November. Then 2 federal judges ruled that the administration had to make use of that money, but the administration announced it would only partially fund the program for November. Then you had a judge coming back and saying they should dole out the full benefits, but then the Supreme Court stayed the order so an appeals court could weigh in. Right, and then over the weekend, you had the Trump administration taking the opportunity to tell states to stop issuing full benefits and even undo distributions that had already been made. So then the appeals court quickly weighed in and said that Trump must give out the full benefits. Right, and while that, it may be a win, all this back and forth, it means that food aid has already been delayed for tens of millions of Americans, some having only received a fraction of the help that they usually get, and others just still waiting, or just unsure if their payments will ever arrive. And so ultimately, while the potential end of the shutdown, it is sorely needed in many ways, we are going to see continued impacts. And there's also this question about the consequences of these Democrats rolling over. There are going to be impacts that are still felt. It's just a question of what, when, how. And there's also the question about what the consequences will be politically, both for Democrats and Republicans. And so with that said, that is the news. And this part, this is my opinion. I'm open to the possibility that December comes, things play out a certain way, and I realize, oh shit, I was actually being short-sighted. But for right now, it feels like what these 8 did, though I really think it's probably more, what they did was pathetic. It was cowardice, and it's going to blow up in their face. And I say that possibly more people were involved because these 8, they have something in common. They are not facing their voters in 26. 2 are retiring, 3 are up for re-election in 28, and 3 are up for re-election in 30. Yeah, it makes me, pocket that little 5 to 10 minute rant video and focus on Chuck Schumer instead. Because Chuck, I think you think you're being smooth with it. But Chuck, I'm seeing more people than ever thinking you are a weak, mealy-mouthed weasel. Right? And with that, I'll say, I knew that you weren't built for this moment, but holy shit, it's almost impressive how useless you are. Like, it's no secret. You are up for re-election in 26, and it really looks like you're trying to save face with this no vote, but it appears that everyone's seeing right through you. But also, even if you're not being sneaky, it's not a great look, because you've either helped orchestrate the situation, have these 8 kind of take the hit, hope that it doesn't really affect them in the future. So you're being sneaky, or these 8 just ignored you, and so you're just ineffective, and neither of those situations inspire confidence. Right? Whoever headed either situation shouldn't lead. Like, your one qualifier is, I guess, you put the L in leader. But hey, again, I could be right, I could be wrong. I guess we'll see in December. And in the meantime, of course, I'd love to know your thoughts. What are your opinions, reactions? What are your takes here? Right, but then actually another thing that we can talk about connected to this is with, the shutdown wrapping up, some argue that this means that we could get the ball rolling on another issue. Swearing in Adelita Grijalva and releasing the Epstein files. Right, because after 6 weeks in limbo, we saw reports this morning that Speaker Mike Johnson plans to swear in Grijalva before the government funding vote. Right, and we've talked about this a bit. She won a special election back in September to represent Arizona in the House, but Johnson, he's come up with excuse after excuse as to why she couldn't be sworn in. Though very few actually believe those excuses and saw this as him really trying to drag his feet. Right, not wanting the House to vote on a measure to release the Epstein files because her vote would have put the thing over the top. And so now with her swearing in seemingly around the corner, the Epstein situation is opening back up. And the timing here, it is very significant because we also just learned that Ghislaine Maxwell is reportedly seeking a commutation from Trump, with Representative Jamie Raskin sending a letter to Trump claiming that the House Judiciary Committee received new information and documents from a whistleblower. And those documents indicate that Maxwell is, quote, working on filing a commutation application with your administration, demonstrating either that Miss Maxwell is herself requesting you release her from her 20-year prison sentence for her role as a co-conspirator in Jeffrey Epstein's international child sex trafficking ring, or that this child sex predator now holds such tremendous sway in the second Trump administration that you and your DOJ will follow her clemency recommendations. And this is, according to the whistleblower, Maxwell is getting preferential treatment at the minimum security prison that she just happened to be transferred to over the summer, not long after a meeting with Deputy AG Todd Blanche. With the letter saying that the staff at federal prison Camp Bryan have been waiting on her hand and foot. She reportedly had customized meals delivered to her cell, gotten private meetings with guests who were allowed to bring computers, enabling her to contact the outside world, and she got to fucking play with a puppy? I mean, it's also damn ridiculous. In fact, one of the top officials at the prison has apparently even complained that he is, quote, sick of having to be Maxwell's bitch. And this is, there have been reports where they got emails where she said she was much happier at this facility, and writing, I feel like I have dropped through Alice in Wonderland's looking glass. Right? And then also in this letter to Trump, you had Raskin writing, you should not grant any form of clemency to this convicted and unrepentant sex offender. Your administration should not be providing her with room service, with puppies to play with federal law enforcement officials waiting on her every need, or with any special treatment or institutional privilege at all. With Raskin demanding that Trump make AG Blanche available for a public hearing to address these allegations, and also asking that Trump answer a handful of questions like, has he discussed a commutation with Maxwell or anyone in his administration? Did he direct anyone to give Maxwell preferential treatment? And what have Maxwell's attorneys and associates promised him? Right? And this is also not the only recent effort for transparency on this case that we've seen from lawmakers. Right? Just last week, they requested an interview with ex-Prince Andrew, who lost his royal titles over Epstein allegations. A letter saying that the House Oversight Committee is seeking to uncover the identities of Mr. Epstein's co-conspirators and enablers. But there, I'd say, while it's worth noting that Congress does have subpoena powers, because Andrew is a foreign national, he could just ignore the summons. But for now, we'll have to see what happens next with Adelita Grijalva, with the Epstein petition, and also with this potential commutation. And then there's more we're gonna get into in a moment, but first, let me say, they're all go ahead, treat yourself, and then boom, interest rates higher than your self-esteem at brunch. Right? That's the trap, keeping you paying forever while banks throw parties with your money. Then enter today's sponsor, PDS Debt, the company that I'm pretty sure banks are getting tired of, because they've already helped hundreds of thousands of people cut their debt, stop the collection calls, and finally keep more of their cash where it belongs, in their pockets, not the banks. Whether it's credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills, PDS Debt creates custom plans built around your real situation, not one-size-fits-all nonsense. No minimum credit score, no gimmicks, just real people helping you find a real way out. Or they'll look at your numbers, figure out what works for you, and get you moving toward debt-free faster than your interest can pile up. They're A+ rated by the BBB with thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot because they actually deliver results. Because bottom line, the system's rigged, but that doesn't mean that you have to play by its rules. And right now, you're just 30 seconds away from starting your journey to being debt-free. So get your free assessment and find your best option right now at pdsdebt.com pdsdebt.com/DeFranco. It's pdsdebt.com/DeFranco, or even easier, use that QR code on screen. But then next up, in the news today, we should probably talk about Donald Trump pardoning Rudy Giuliani and the Kraken, because many woke up today to find U.S. pardon attorney Ed Martin saying that Trump signed presidential pardons for 77 of his allies accused of trying to overturn the 2020 election. And this list of names includes the likes of John Eastman, a lawyer who advised Trump's 2020 campaign, and Sidney Powell, aka the Kraken, a conservative pundit who kind of became the public face of the campaign for a minute. And in this document that Martin shared, it was dated for Friday, and it reads that the pardon is full, complete, and unconditional, and that it, quote, ends a grave national injustice perpetrated upon the American people following the 2020 presidential election, and continues the process of national reconciliation. Right, many of the people on this list were those that led the push to pressure state legislatures to reject Biden's victory, especially in key swing states like Georgia, where Giuliani, Eastman, Powell, and even Trump himself were indicted back in 2023 by an Atlanta grand jury. But also a big thing I'll say with this is, while yes, it understandably is making headlines, this is largely seen as entirely symbolic, right? Because these pardons, they only apply to federal charges, and none of these people are actually facing any of those. Right? And so for their state level charges and cases, it's not going to do a damn thing. So for like Giuliani in Arizona, he's currently facing election interference charges because, according to prosecutors, he was part of a scheme that was looking to falsely declare Trump the winner of the 2020 election. But also, that's not to say these pardons don't matter, because, well, yes, maybe they're largely symbolic now. In the future, it would prevent later administrations from targeting these people. And with that, you had Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt saying in a statement, "These great Americans were persecuted and put through hell by the Biden administration for challenging an election, which is the cornerstone of democracy." And adding, President Trump is putting an end to the Biden regime's communist tactics once and for all. Right? And so with all this news, I think there are lessons here. One, it is kind of the continuation of Donald Trump very publicly showing, hey, as long as you kind of do what I say or roll with me, I'll do whatever I can to protect you. But also in doing this, and really so much of what he's been doing in the second administration, I think it's shown pretty much anyone that's not aboard the Trump train how important local elections are. Right? States' rights, states' laws, who you're electing to enforce those things. It's always been important, but it's really more important than ever, and really more highlighted than ever. Accountability and norms been out the window. But then next up in the news, if you thought the stuff that RFK Jr. has been doing and saying from his post in DC that was crazy, just wait till you hear what his friends are saying down in Austin, Texas. Because the anti-vax nonprofit that he founded, Children's Health Defense, they hosted a conference there over the weekend titled Moment of Truth. And you had about 1,000 people attending. You had activists, homeopaths, physicians, lawyers, parents, some with their autistic children, and for the first time ever, sitting politicians. And while RFK wasn't there, at least in physical form, he was certainly there in spirit. Or with vendors selling glass ornaments featuring his face, Maha hoodies and scarves, hats reading RFK Jr. was right about everything, and even baby onesies emblazoned with unvaxxed, unafraid. But as much respect as there was for the health secretary, there was also some grumbling that he wasn't anti-vax enough. Or with Ray Flores, for example, a senior outside counsel for Children's Health Defense, complaining that Kennedy's wasted too much time going after stuff like food dyes and ultra-processed food when he should be focused on vaccines, saying we don't want to hear about Fruit Loops or donuts or anything else. And Mark Gorton, the president of the Maha Institute, calling the CHD's website some pretty weak anti-vaxxery and arguing that we need to be more boldly anti-vax. Right, and that along with normal stuff like RFK's former communications director, Del Bigtree, declaring God is an anti-vaxxer. Right, and all of this is, of course, RFK has often claimed he's not technically speaking anti-vax, saying he just supports stricter clinical trials, greater transparency, and freedom of choice. And so also what you saw at the event were some defending his position, like CHD's chief scientific officer, Brian Hooker, saying, I'm a scientist, I want to be more demure about the whole thing and a little bit more circumspect. And then adding, if a broad sweeping epidemic emerged and I was thoroughly convinced that the only way out of it was to immunize, I'd be for it. And CHD's chief executive, Barry Holland, telling the Washington Post, CHD is not anti-vax, we're pro-informed consent. But then again, when you look at some of the other panels and booths at the conference, even that thin veneer of reasonableness, it quickly evaporates. Right? And there are just numerous examples, including, one group called Blessed by his name that matches, quote, mRNA tech-free blood donations to recipients. Right, but then also you had some more high-profile names in the mix, including Republican Senators Ron Johnson and Rand Paul. And you had both attending virtually, Paul delivering a talk entitled, Why Isn't Tony Fauci in Prison? And it was exactly what you'd expect.
People are impatient. They say, why not just drag him in? We can subpoena him, and we will if we don't get a voluntary agreement. The problem, of course, is he was pardoned by President Biden. So is President Biden's pardon valid? Is the autopen a valid way to do it? I have recommended charges to the Department of Justice under Biden and again under Trump.
You then also had Florida Surgeon General, who's the same guy who once compared vaccine mandates to slavery, speaking, and he had some rather dramatic words for the press in attendance.
I saw reporters from Washington Post and The Atlantic that represent these forces that, and I have nothing against them, but, just to be clear, they represent forces who are working toward the enslavement of humanity.
Also, if you were willing to pay a few $100 extra to access a special portion of the event, you got to see a conversation between comedian Russell Brand and RFK's wife, actress Cheryl Hines. And you had one reporter summing up Brand's contribution to the event saying, Brand flopped in an armchair with his shirt undone, rolled through manic monologues about all kinds of topics. Catching lizards with Kennedy, his trials, parenting a sick child, the strength of President Donald Trump's handshake, and French First Lady Brigitte Macron's alleged male member. Ramblings that seemed to make Hines and some of its mostly white, older audience visibly uncomfortable. Right, and then with that, there's also been a lot of talk about Hines herself. Right, on one hand, she's been married to Kennedy since 2014. But then on the other hand, you had Politico reporting in 2021 that she had asked guests to a party to be vaccinated against COVID. And then the next year, she called RFK's comparison of people resisting vaccines to Anne Frank reprehensible and insensitive, and saying that her husband's views were not a reflection of her own. But now, in more recent months, she's waded more and more into politics, taking RFK's side on vaccine issues